So in this video, I'm joined by Alex Sidorenko. You might know him from Twitter, from his visually rich videos about Next.js. I happened to have a conversation with him and I was like, I'm enjoying your videos, so let's have a conversation about this different mediums of communication and education about developments and web development. So thank you, Alex, for joining me.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So for folks who might not know you, because if it wasn't for Twitter and the videos, the short videos that you create there, I wouldn't have probably come across your work. And I have, because I'm working in Next.js and in the next, I'm kind of active in the Next.js community, I came across your videos and instantly back in the time where there wasn't much content around the app router, this new huge shift in React server components, and there was a lot of confusion in Next.js or even in React. I found myself digging through the documentation, trying to make sense of it, and at the same time, I saw your short videos also talking about the pain points, the confusion. So before we dive into that and the medium in which we are communicating this, why don't you take us back and give us a little introduction about yourself and your path to Next.js?
Let's start from the beginning, I guess. So I started this whole my whole front-end journey like 13 years ago, maybe 14, don't remember, in the agency in Ukraine. And the thing is, at the time, so at the agency in Ukraine, you would start as a markuper, they would call you like a markup sort of a person. You do CSS, HTML, and then to progress in your career, you start with that, and then the next step of your careers is supposedly like PHP, or something like that. So I started as this sort of a markup person, and so people were doing CSS and HTML, but also JavaScript, right? And everyone sort of hated JavaScript at the time, and I loved it. And what happened is that I ended up asking people to give them the tasks that, involve JavaScript. And after a while, I ended up basically doing all the JavaScript in the company. And the thing is, I did that for a while, and then I got kind of this career move that I was moved into the PHP land, and I did a few projects, and I went to my boss and I was like, I need to get back, I miss the JavaScript stuff so much. I like the user interfaces. I like the challenge of it, and so I went back. I started doing all the JavaScript in the company. It was at the time when we had jQuery, and that's it. But then the things started moving forward in JavaScript world with Backbone, Marinette, Angular, and eventually React. So the JavaScript started getting a bit hotter, and we started bringing more people in the company to work with JavaScript. And after my 5 years in the company, we ended up with a JavaScript department and me being ahead of it. And but the thing is, the problem I had at the agency at the time was that I love JavaScript and all that, but I sort of realized that I don't understand whether what I do work or not, in terms of the business value, whether it brings any business value or not, because in agency it's kind of hard because you jump in between projects a lot and you do a lot of stuff and you end up sort of setting the goals for yourself, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to understand whether what I write actually delivers value to someone. So that's when I jumped off from agency and went to startups, and the last 8 years I spent in startups, basically in 2 startups. Spent 2 years in this startup from Berlin, and another 6 in my current one. It's an edtech company from UK, but basically in these 6 years, doing everything from like front end JavaScript design, user research, and all that. I kind of finally learned whether what I do worked or not. And at this point, I kind of wish maybe, maybe it wasn't that good of an idea. But yeah, that was my journey. What brought me to, kind of from one side of it, what brought me into law is JavaScript, and another one is I'm actually what got me really like pragmatic in terms of the stuff I do, because the startups I work in are there's not a lot of VC money or anything like that. So the startup I work right now, it's quite scrappy, and we need to we need to do a lot of stuff just to survive. So yeah, it taught me a lot of you know a lot of pragmatism in terms of in terms of code and stuff. And I think the part of it you see in my videos as well. So the pragmatism that I used, that I realized that required for you to bring value to people in terms of, building SaaS projects is the same pragmatism I use for creating educational videos. So that's kind of an overview of it. But like in terms of
Yeah.
me, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, but in terms of me just getting into Next.js, it's interesting, right? Because I started this journey of education by, I have a blog, and in this blog I was doing the education around React. So what brought me to Next.js is React, right? And the thing is, and that's interesting because like Next.js right now, what they do with server components is that they push forward React, right? If you think about it. Because if Remix at some point, if Remix decided to go with server component, and if they were first, I would probably just, do education around Remix. Because my core sort of a thing that I do education on is React. So yeah, the Next.js being this, this force that pushes forward the new React ideas, despite having a lot of, backlash from it. That's what got me to Next.js, and that's why what get me all the sort of respect for Next.js for pushing this technology forward. That's why I'm doing the education in this area.
I see. So let's backtrack a little bit from Next.js. I like the journey that you had starting probably where most of us got started in the front end, HTML, markup, CSS, and then a little bit of JavaScript. And then you moved to back end to PHP. And then you're like, maybe I enjoy front end more. You moved to JavaScript. And back then, like, it was like Backbone, jQuery, maybe just simple templating languages. And then React comes to the scene, maybe first as a reactive templating language and then expands beyond that as we move on. And the contrast you had between working in an agency where you don't actually see the effect of your code or the result of whatever it is that you're designing or building in terms of user experience and business returns, and moving to a startup. It's a wide variety of, I think, experience that you have had. In a startup, you're just there in the trenches. You build something, you can see how it translates into business, into user interaction. And I think that has led you, as you mentioned, into being pragmatic, being concise with what you're building. And when you're looking through React or to Next.js, you're looking through the lens of building something with it. What are the pain points in the projects that I am building and what people probably are going to face? How can you easily solve this and simply explain it for other people? That's actually a similarity that I have with my content, because in the beginning, I was just building with React and Next.js. And when the app router came, I was trying to dig into the documentation to figure out something that I was building. And then I shared, hey, this is how I build using the server components, data fetching, pagination, infinite scrolling, searching, and whatnot. And this seems to be what everybody else is also building and struggling, and the features that they want, or they can't really translate from the pages router into the app router. And at the same time, I saw your content actually covering those same ideas, those same practical points in when you're building an application. It's not so much the concept of server components versus client components, and what gets sent to here and whatnot, or what's going behind this. It's not that. It's just like, okay, these are server components. This is how you actually fetch data. This is how you would use client-side interactivity, browser APIs, client components. So let's dive a bit deeper into that, because I think that's where mostly the audience of my channel or your videos is interested. Before diving into this medium or how you got to creating these videos, now take me back. In the startup company that you're working, were you using Next.js then, or is it like React with a backend separate? Because that's the most popular setup for React. It's just a backend Express or whatever server, and then maybe even Python server, but then framework, and then in the front end you have React.
That's a great question, because it leads us to a bit of a rabbit hole, right? Because what we have is Rails API and React. And how we got there is that we had the monolith Rails up for everything. Before I came to this project, and so the folks, they get limited by the Rails alone, because what we needed to build is sort of like a PowerPoint experience in the web, right? And it was really hard to build it with Rails at the time, at least. I'm not following the Rails community and what they do right now closely, but at the time it was like really hard to do. So we started creating the front end that was React, and but we kept the Rails as a backend. And that's an interesting rabbit hole, because that's the thing about React. A lot of people, when they talk about React, the word you often hear is overcomplicated. But the thing that I see when I see React is simplifying, because the React as an idea it's an idea that simplifies the complexity of client-side interaction, right? Because when Jordan went into the stage and presented the idea of React, it was like, you know what? Everything is too complicated. You need to do a lot of manual imperative updates on your code base, and as your code base growth, it kind of gets into a kind of a mess of spaghetti code and stuff. What if we do the same thing as PHP does, or any other server-side template in Engine, when we just re-render everything from scratch? What if every time you update an input field, the state of your input field, your entire page was regenerated from scratch, and with the new state? And that's what React does, right? Plus a lot of optimizations. But so to me, React is about simplification, right? Because it's like it gives you simplification over complex tasks. Like, I want to build a PowerPoint on the web. I want to build a Figma of the web. I want to build this and that, like the really rich application with rich user experience. Then React is the tool that simplifies this job for you, and that's what it is, And in terms of us, it's still create React app plus React and Rails backend. So still no Next.js, but yeah, that's
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Very interesting. So your love for Next.js, as you mentioned, comes from the fact that they're really pushing React and the cutting edge changes that's coming into React, whether it's suspense, streaming, server components, and Next.js is the frontier of the frameworks actually bringing this into reality before even it is stable in React. So that's an interesting perspective. If because the things I see in your videos, it's very similar to the type of video that I create, or as if you were creating Next.js apps day in and day out, and these are your own pain points, and you're like, okay, this is how to think about it. This is how simply this means. This is how you implement this. It comes from an experience. Now, you haven't used Next.js, but you can now understand from a perspective of React, or the pain point of really building any UI as a function of state. That's what React is. And I like how you put it, because you're right. Oftentimes when you talk about React, they're like, yeah, it has a huge learning curve. It's complex, the different hooks that you can use. And now with this new change, server components, streaming suspense, how do you wrap this around your head? What gets rendered on the server? What's sent to the client? Is it the client-side frame library? Is it a full stack? But when you really think about it, when you actually understand how React works, it actually simplifies. So you just declare what you want and it just does it. Now, if you want to dive deeper into how it is doing it behind the scene and what's going on, yes, it is complex. But as a developer, it actually, in my opinion, similar to yours, has a very good DX in that you don't have to worry about, now even like with React compiler, you don't even have to worry about optimizing your app. You just define what you want as a function of state, and React takes care of everything else. So take us deeper into React then, and the journey React has gone through from back in the days being class components and then functional hooks, and now server components expanding from the server to the client.
So and that's as I said, that's what got me to Next.js, because so when React came out like the first time, it solved the problem. And what I see happening right now is that they solve another problem, right? So they solve the problem of the complexity growing exponentially in your front-end application when you were using just jQuery or JavaScript or something, and your application is rich on those user interactions. But now they're solving another one, right? The problem that Ryan Florence talked about just recently about kind of crossing this gap between the server and the client. And the thing is, again, I'm not going to pretend that I'm, a backend developer or anything like that. Like, I have a lot of gaps in my backend knowledge, and to me, Next.js right now, as to a lot of folks in the community, I think right now is just an exploration as well of this thing. Like, how far can I get from understanding React into understanding the backend as well, and the layer between them that they're now building using React as a tool, and how well they could solve this problem of composing server and client. Because this is, I don't know, like this idea seems to me like it is really, really novel idea. I haven't seen it anywhere else before. Like we see the Livewire and Hotwire right now, but it's a bit different from what the new model of server components offers, right? Because of the compositions, those crazy stuff when you can wrap client components around server components and put the client component inside, and wrap your server time component with druggable, and it will just work out of the box. And if you think about it, you can say, well, I can just create my PHP app or something or Rails and just add a sprinkle of JavaScript, and it will do the drag and drop, or even just add the druggable to div and it will do the drag and drop as well. But the thing with React is that the druggable component is a mature library sort of for building. There is a lot of libraries that people spent years building on, and now the server components that you can now use those libraries not only on you can still use them only on the client, but now you can compose them with the server, and they sort of bring all those existing infrastructure into, into this full stack thing, which is absolutely new. And to me, I think that the biggest potential of React Server components is what libraries we'll see in the future. Because to me, I cannot fathom what type of libraries you'll see. Like I tweeted the other day, the full stack component that is basically auto-completes your text area with, AI, OpenAI, for example. And it can be just one component, because right now you can compose things under the hood with server and client, and the end user gets the results. And the same if you think about like forms, for example. One of the big problems right now with forms is that people are trying to use the old patterns and bringing them to their server components, and it doesn't work as well. You need to use client a lot. But what I kind of think will happen in the future is that someone will come up with form primitives, not the form libraries with hooks, but just form primitives. For example, imagine you build a form, and it's similar to like Remix, I guess, to some extent. Imagine you're building a form with RC, and there is a form component and form error component. And those are the client components, but you can compose them inside your server component, inside your server page, right? And to that extent, you can use all the server features. For example, let's say you have internationalization, right? The new way they suggest in Next.js, you build it so that you just get the translations directly in your server components, and you just insert them. And then the pain point that a lot of folks experience right now is that, wow, but if I have the form, I now need to pass a lot of data with my translations to this form. But imagine you have a form library that are those small client primitives. And now you can compose your form on the server using client primitives that will give you error handling, like whatever you need, the client interaction, the pending state, everything. But you're still able to use the translation directly from the server. You see? Because you can just insert them there.
Yeah.
And this new
Yeah.
paradigm is that this is crazy to me. Like I can't even imagine the type of components we will have in the future. This excites me a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's unpack a couple of things you mentioned there. It ties in very nicely in the direction that React has taken in the past, few releases, starting from Suspense really back in, I think, React 18, and then now as the foundation for server components. And now you mentioned Ryan Florence's talk. It's called Mind the Gap. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend reading it from a high level. It's just what Alex mentioned. It's the gap. The gap is the gap between the server, the backend, and the front end, and how React in this new version has closed off, had kind of resolved these two in one. You never really understand how it just moves from one to the other. Another talk that I really liked was Dan Abramov's in React Conf. He talked about it in the concept of React for two computers, writing some code on the server, and then a part of that later on happens on the client, as a good mental model for how React is kind of resolving this gap of network between your server and your front end. And what you mentioned is really interesting, of how you're now composing client-side JavaScript inside of your server code. Because before it was like, okay, you render something on the server, you send it with some JavaScript code that just renders or starts working on the client. Now you can bring in all of those functionalities, or you can think of it in your logic inside of your server components. You can interweave client and server components together, just moving out of the boundary of the network in and out. It's just mind-boggling. And all the new opportunities with the libraries that can be built around this idea of building primitives that you can now run on the server. It's really exciting, and I like the way that you put this, because oftentimes you don't really think about this two together. Client-side JavaScript is was usually separate from what you run on the server. You just ship that JavaScript in a separate file, in a separate module to the browser to do the thing. But now it's just one thing. It's just meant to run on two different computers at different times. You don't have to worry about the network in between.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing is that me being pragmatic, right? I understand that it's harder to write the code right now. Because the folks like saying like, you know, why can I use this on click here? Or, you know, I understand that people who need to create an MVP or even to create like a project right now, they won't be building the granular the granular like small form components or anything like that because it's just too complicated. So, but the thing is like the beauty of it is like Next sort of still allows you to just, you know, just put use client, use the form, React hook form or anything, you know, just use it as you used it before. And sort of what I believe will happen is that the new libraries will appear. And I think this kind of this creating of those interactive abstractions, I think the ideal future for React server components is that they will, you know, the libraries will take over. That problem is that the people won't necessarily think of those problems themselves. It's sort of like with use effect, right? Like we started by creating a lot of effects when it just first came out, but then you got the React query, right? Then you got a lot of new abstractions on top of it. And folks were like, you know, well, you don't need to use effects as much, just rely on libraries. And I think the same will happen with this interleaving kind of a part, because, and the form is perfect example of that, because like the idea of this form library that just client component primitives is out there. Someone will build it for sure. And it's like you as I imagine it, you won't need to think about it a lot. You know, you would just use the form library, you just use a form with capital F instead of usual form, and it will just work. You just slap the form error somewhere, and it just works because the form has a context provider, and the form error has context consumer, and you don't think about it at all. You just put the name of the form error component, and it just picks up the error of your form, and that's it, you know? And that's how I envision the future of this whole, like, you know, server components, and it will be great because once again, I think it will simplify the things. As React did, like you have a slightly like difficult learning curve, but you have a lot of stuff out of the box from all those libraries, you know, and all existing infrastructure. The same will happen with server components for sure. And people will be able, with AI plus server components, to build stuff in like minutes.
I agree. Now, you talked about the fact that it may be hard for folks to wrap their head around when to use which, or why can't they use client-side interactivity here, or data fetching, or async in client components. Now, what is it that you have seen from your own community being the main pain point when it comes to new React concepts or Next.js?
New React concepts or Next.js? Well, let's do both, right? So
Yes.
Next.js, let's do Next.js. So the main pain points of Next.js are caching, hosting, client server decomposition, internationalization, right? I'm missing something huge here. But yeah, they're all on the nose. Authentication, right? Yeah, exactly. You know that. Yeah. Authentication. Yeah. So they're all on the nose, but the thing is, Lee is aware of all of them, right? So they are tackling all of them. So that's, you know, that's the beauty of the current infrastructure, or the current kind of a GS ecosystem, is that it's so competitive. You have to stay on top of your game in order to, you know, there is Remix and Next.js. You know, and this competition, it's like if you just sleep for a second, you lost. And that's the beauty of it. And, you know, they keep tackling all this problem. But yeah, so caching, authentication, and then only then you have like a new concept of server components. But even with server components, I feel like folks start like to get it in the pragmatic way again. They like, you know what? I use a page as a server component, and then I put everything else in the use client thing, and I will use that like server component as a wrapper on top of the client component, and that's it. They're finding ways to figure out how to use it pragmatically, and I think it's the way to go right now. You know, until we have all the new libraries and all this stuff, just find the way that works for you and the most pragmatic things, and go with it.
Yeah, I agree. The topics or concepts you mentioned are also the pain points that I have felt with my community's feedback, mostly, or the most pain point being around caching. And that is reflected in the new version of Next.js by changing the defaults, because it was different layers of caching from server to the HTTP cache to a router cache, confusing people into why something needs to be dynamic and it's not, or expecting something to be dynamic and it's now static. The default is going to change to be dynamic, which kind of makes sense. And then if you want to opt into caching, you just have to set that directive to opt into caching. So I think that's still an ongoing problem and confusion around how to use Next.js. Authentication, I18N, because there is no, for internationalization, because there is no native support in the app router as it was for the pages router, the implementation is more. Some of the libraries that people are used to using in internationalization are not yet fully support the app router, or they're just having workarounds. You mentioned hosting. Did you mean hosting Next.js apps, or hosting the data fetching and stuff?
I don't know, hosting Next.js stuff. Like one of the pains
Yeah,
that comes up is like, where should I host if it's not Vercel, basically.
host. Yes, yeah, I have had that as well, and I think it is worth paying some attention to, because for myself, when we are talking about Next.js, the easiest way to just deploy it, if it's not a static Next.js app where you can just deploy it anywhere, it just is a bit difficult to kind of configure it the way that it needs to work in platforms outside of Vercel. But this is something that I need to personally work on in terms of content. And I don't know if you have or not. I haven't noticed anything or seen anything in yours, but maybe you have some stuff coming up.
No, I have zero expertise on that, to be honest. And in general, as I said, I'm not going to pretend that I understand the infrastructure or anything like that. I'm learning all that right now. Like I'm a, front-end person driven like with the product needs of the users. So, yeah, I have nothing in terms of content around the hosting or anything like that. Maybe we'll create some, but yeah, again, I'm not sure whether it's like fits the medium I agree, but the thing is, getting back to caching a little bit, right? That's interesting because it's such a hard problem to solve. And if you think about it, the
Hmm.
caching thing, the way they solved it with Pages Router was kind of genius. Because think about it, like you have a page with Pages Router, and by default, it is getting pre-built during the build time. It's pre-generated during the build time, right? And you don't need even to think about it. It just works because like caching by default and doing static by default with pages router just works because the mental model is simple, right? You have a page, it's static. But then if you want to add the data fetching, you explicitly choose the method, right? So whether it's get server-side props or get static props, you explicitly choose the how do you want to render your page. But with app routers, so what I feel is that they try to kind of move the same model to the app router, like when it's static by default and dynamic by on demand, right? But it kind of it's not explicit anymore. It's implicit now because it is static by default, but then if you use cookie, you opt into a dynamic rendering, and if you use that, you opt into dynamic rendering, and this and that. That's why I had I had one of my tweets. I suggested, like, we need to if they could somehow turn it back to being explicit, or at least as explicit as possible, that would solve it. Because the pains I see in the community, the majority of them is about them not understanding what happens. And you see, like you have two paths out of that, right? You either give the some kind of a dev tool, right? That shows all the what happens in your app, what getting cached, whether this page is dynamic or static. And again, it's like it's a lot of complexity. Me being a pragmatic person, I like how can you solve it before doing the dev tool? Is it possible to somehow make it more explicit? My suggestion was it was like harsh, just ask person, like when you do the fetch, for example, just throw an error and say you have to specify the method, like whether you want to do the for example, like if you have the page, you still can pre-build it statically, right? But if you do any data fetching, could we just throw an error and say specify whether you want to build statically or dynamically right now? Because right now it involves some data fetching and you need to decide what to do with it. And I understand, it's like simplistic model. It probably doesn't work because of a lot of stuff. But anything that can put developer back in the driver's seat, I think, in terms of caching, everything will work. But again, that they, as you mentioned, they can remake the caching system for V15, and it's I'm super excited to see how they do it.
But it is a, as you mentioned, complicated or complex problem here because there are different layers of this caching happening. But I think the problem is, as you mentioned, the pages router, it was just, you had two functions. It was just like function, get server-side props, get static props for your data fetching, and then there was another function for your page component that runs pre-renders on the server and on the client. So the data fetching was kind of encapsulated in this function. You would pick server-side props if you wanted to depend on anything that's on the request object, so it's on demand, it's at runtime, or nothing from the request object, just slap and get static props and it's done. I think the problem comes because now you can fetch data inside React components. Because of the server components that allows you to turn the function into an async function, now you can fetch data there. Okay, so you're fetching data there. It's now caching in the fetch, sure. Are we pre-rendering the page again or not? Is it that do you depend on anything that comes from runtime, request objects, search parameters, cookies, headers, and whatnot? So unwillingly, it's like it's separated into different things that the most explicit way to kind of turn it into how the pages router was to use route config segment options. So you just go export const dynamic force dynamic or force static, and then that would just turn the whole page as if you were using the get server side props. But then even then, if you were to if you wanted to get that type of functionality, you would have had to set it to error out if you were also using something from the cookies and headers and requests in the page to say, hey, you're saying you want to be static, but you're using the cookies here, so let's error out. There's still ways to turn it into how the pages router was working, but I guess people also are interested into benefiting from all these new features in Next.js and optimizing their app to the extent that they can. That brings in some of that complexity or issues. Otherwise, you can just set your route config segment options to error route if you want it to be a static. But I think the different layers, for me personally, and the problem that I see from people is sometimes even the router cache. It's not when you're fetching data, whether it needs to happen at build time or dynamically at runtime. It's just a router cache in the client-side browser where we didn't have that before. It's now just caching the payload that comes from the server, so it's not re-rendering that server component if it's already fetched. So that might resolve some of the problem, but it is complex, as you mentioned, and I hope the new version and what they're doing around it, and as you mentioned, even more dev tools might bring some clarity into what's happening under the hood. I saw a video you did recently on looking at your network tab to see if it's a cache hit or a miss. And I really like that because sometimes people are like, okay, just anything that will show me what's happening, even if it's not like a primitive I can slap on my fetch request, but like even in the dev tools, show me what's happening here. And I think that would be very helpful if it comes into like, I don't know, maybe the React dev tools so that you can see what parts are being cached. Like the React compiler now, if you add it, it just stars the components that are being memoized. Same way, it could just show what components are cached, what components are rendering dynamically in the browser.
Yeah,
So I think it will
I'm
come in the
pretty
future.
sure
It's just a
it's
matter
been
of
working
giving
right
it some
now,
time to
right?
cook.
Guillermo tweeted a while ago the screenshot of some sort of a potential dev tool for caching, and it looked amazing. So yeah, I'm pretty. But as I said, to be clear, it's a complicated problem. When I said that, the caching got implicit when you switch from pages to the app router, it's not because, it's not because people just missed it, it's just because the model is different and it just super complicated to get it right. So yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, hopefully they'll find a way to solve this problem. But it is the biggest problem for sure right now in the community. Well, maybe on par with authentication, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, authentication, it is also I think it's not as confusing given the amazing libraries that are out there from NextAuth or even services like Clerk that makes it super easy. If you were to implement authentication yourself, it's hard, difficult for sure. But using these type of libraries already abstracts a lot of those complexities out. You just slap in a middleware or some UI components and you have authentication in your app. It just makes it very easy for us as front-end developers to also expand beyond that border and go to the backend. As you mentioned, we are now writing, APIs. You have authentications. You dabble into the middleware, which is like an express middleware that runs before the request. So we're not really front-end developers anymore. We're just this. They're kind of the line between the two is dissolving. We're like product engineers in that you're building a product and you have to take care of whatever this product needs, from authentication, APIs to the front-end UIs, the styling, and all that. And it has definitely enabled me to do more, to be able to build applications that I couldn't have 6 years ago. You should have been either a front end waiting for a back end developer to give you some APIs to call in a React app and not having to do anything with authentication, but now actually also
There's also
worrying about or
about
designing your whole entire
yeah, sorry,
infrastructure.
just on that,
Now we talked
there
about the
was a
content and you
talk with Guillermo
go ahead. Go
where
ahead.
he mentioned that the thing that stuck with me is that this new sort of a front end thingy that is going on, what it allows you to do is it resonates to me a lot from coming from startups and building products for users that are user interface centric, right? Because when you do those types of products, and those not all products are like that, right? But some of them are. Like some products are user interface centric, and where users don't care too much about, the what happens on the back end of, or even if it's fast, or the backend is fast or not, but what they care is like the visual sort of experience. And what Guillermo said is interesting, because he said this whole new thing allows us to start building products starting from the user, meaning the front end first. So let's say you want to build an MVP or something with AI right now. So instead of thinking, how can I set up all this infrastructure and do the authentication and all that, you build the demo or MVP with, with Vercel AI or something. You deploy it on Vercel, and you just validate your idea whether it works or not, because you already build the stuff that will be seen by your users, and that's it. And you slap your Clerk or something there, so something that you have some sort of identification. And then if it works, Then you expand into the backend and you start doing the infrastructure and all that, because as we all know, chances are it will not work, right? With startups or with any types of products, most of the stuff don't work. So given like this ability of iterating on the front and started to iterate on the front end where you don't need to build up all this foundation, where you just start with user experience, you do it in a couple of days, you push it, you show it to people, people like, meh, you move on to another thing, you do it again, people like, wow, that's a cool thing. And now you start building the backend and all the infrastructure and everything. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it has enabled a lot of businesses to just focus on the business logic. Here's an idea, and then let's go build it. You don't have to worry about anything else. It just enables us developers or founders or startups to just go from idea to a product very fast, just test it, validate it, iterate on it, and then move on without having to worry about any of this stuff that's now abstracted away from us, from the back end, the infrastructure, everything that you just mentioned. It's just, I think it's a super good time to be a developer. It used to be way harder than this. For even me, I haven't been in the business like 13, 14 years ago, but I would imagine that back then was way harder for you to just slap on a site to test an idea. You had to think about a lot of things. Or even beyond that, if you go back,
And
you had to
yeah,
think of physical servers to be able to host the
sorry,
website.
just one more
But
thing. It seems like a bit of
moving
a
on
delay.
to the content, I also want to talk.
Speaking about, we had this, beef recently between Rails and the JS sort of a thing. I am a huge fan of DHH and Rails, and I mean, not personally, or I mean, in terms of the way of building things that they promote. As I said before, like I was a digital nomad, traveled a lot, and so I read Remote, which is one of their books, and Rework as well. Those are some brilliant books, And the way those like folks think about the product is like exactly that. They just super pragmatic in a way that you wanna build something and quickly, just build something, push it, build something, push it, build something, push it. Don't think too much about, about the underlying sort of a thing. Don't over obsess about tools. Just build something, push it to the users. And what I think, funny enough, with all the beef, is that the JavaScript community is slowly getting to this place as well. We slowly get into this place as well, right? Where we have tools right now that allows you to build stuff really quickly with and host it like on their source somewhere, Cloudflare or anywhere else. But using Remix, using Astra, even using Next.js, anything, we have more and more tools that allow us to move fast, and I think it's amazing. Again, being the product person myself, that being the startup-y sort of a dude, I think this is really great.
That's the future of where we're moving, definitely, with this new abstractions and frameworks taking, complexities away from our day-to-day job. It allows us to focus on building and shipping the business logic and good products for sure. Now, circling back to the content, I also want to talk about the type of content and the medium in which we're using to, spread the word or kind of help the community, educating the community around new concepts in React and Next.js. I've seen you primarily being active on Twitter with very short form videos that are concise about a specific problem and a very simple way to solve it or think about it. I noticed you mentioned recently that you're going to put a course or a guide together where it just consists of all this different things that you can search to just see short videos about and understand without any flaw. So take us into, you mentioned that you're thinking about it in a very practical way, in a very pragmatic way. Now take us into that medium, because my medium or the way that I'm doing it is in longer format, in more details, sometimes conceptual. We do cover those pain points, but in more details through building maybe an application or just talking about a concept, which kind of complements the way that you're doing it in that it's a short form that can lead into a. So talk about the medium. I wanna get your take on
Sure.
the
Yeah.
medium you're
So
using or you have
it's all
chosen to
started
deliver
with
your
me
nuggets.
doing the blog for React. So I started writing blog for React, and I did a bit of a research at the time, and I found one pain that was very persistent is that people were sort of expressing their tiredness of the long-winded content, and there are different types of long-winded content, right? So that there is a you might read a long article from Dan Abramov, and it will be like reading a novel, right? That you will read it and reread it, and all that because he's an amazing writer. But what people were saying is that there is too much SEO content, and when I need to find something, a lot of times I stumble upon some sort of a, article that filled with unnecessary information and fluff and all that just in order for them to appear in the search results. And what I started is I started building my blog against this pain. So it was the meta pain I was building against. I was like, well, what can we do about it? And I started shortening my content for the blog posts. And I started seeing more and more interest at the time, which I think culminated in the sort of a series I wrote about the React rendering model. And it was like just short visual articles. And initially I wanted to write one huge article about like React rendering, and then I just split them into six short articles, I think. And I kept doing that, and eventually I realized that my articles are like, a couple lines of text and the video. And I was like, well, that's an interesting thing. Do I need a blog for it or not? Like, are there better mediums for that type of content? And I thought about YouTube at first, but then YouTube is not the perfect for this type of content, obviously, because like you need to, well, it's because of a lot of things, right? It might be shorts, but again, it's a bit different. And I was like, well, Twitter is sort of like that. And I started doing Twitter videos about React at first. I even did a few about Remix, I remember, when it get into the from being paid to getting open source. And eventually I switched to Next.js. So that was the progression. I found this meta pain being, people were tired of this SEO sort of stuff. And now I think people are even more tired because of the AI generated content. So, and at this point, and we talked about it before, at this point, like I have my constraint is simple. When I set out to build a video, I tell to myself, like I say to myself, what is the least amount of time? What is the video that would last the least amount of time and explain the topic for a user? Let's say, can I make it 30 seconds? Can I make it 20 seconds? And usually when you start doing that, it's like you realize that at 30 seconds, your video, it kind of dissolves into abstraction that just no one understands. And a lot of my videos are like that because I'm kind of dancing on the edge, and a lot of times I make a video and people like, I just don't understand anything, what's happening, and that's fine because that's my medium. That's how I refine my tool in order to hopefully get better into finding this line, where like I cannot make it more abstract. It's just minute, 10 seconds, and I cannot explain it in the less amount of time. But as you mentioned, like it plays nicely with all other sorts of content because I'm a huge fan of Fireship, right? And he does a lot of those short videos, and I love the C++ in 100 seconds or whatever. And what I think, obviously, you don't learn C++ in 100 seconds, right? And you don't learn, you won't learn Next.js really from my tweets. That's the thing, right? And I'm not going to pretend that you will. So what I do is that in the least amount of time possible, I show you all the doors, like what Fireship does. You see the like how C++ works in 100 seconds, how like Flutter works, this and that, and the Fireship shows that some doors existed that you haven't even thought about. They there then. And you may decide to go and check this door. You may decide, wow, I really like Rust, for example, and now I go and check the documentation. Now I go and check another content creator on YouTube who will explain it in, with all the context and everything that they need to know. And that's what I feel my content does as well. And even with like I'm not, you see the tweet with some concept. My point is that like my goal is for you to understand the concept from this 1 minute. I'm not trying to hook you into anything, right? I'm not selling anything, at least yet. So there is no hook to any other thing. So it's not like shorts like some people do. They just, they do short and they hook it to some other part of content. No. So my point is to teach you in this 1 minute, but it won't be enough, right? And so then, like, ideally, people would look at that, and then they will go and check your channel, and they see how how to create the app with authentication, and how caching works with context of the real application and stuff like that. And then they go and check the like Lee Robinson, and then they go check documentation, and so I kind of hook them into other types of content, but at least like I provide this first sort of an experience really, really fast instead of me doing an introduction, the huge introduction, and while the person is not sure whether it's like, maybe they don't sure if they want to explore Next.js at all. Like why do they need to, hear about my life story or anything like that? But yeah, that's how I think about it. And even about the course that I mentioned on Twitter, like I'm not sure if it will work, right? Because and I am right now I'm trying to find sort of an angle on how to make it valuable to people, because I understand that tweets valuable because you just scroll and you see the tweets and it gives you like it unlocks the concept for you and you go somewhere else and check this concept in detail. But I haven't figured out completely how to do it in the huge sort of a format of a course yet, and I'm not sure I will. Right? I actually announced something similar like 6 months ago, and I just haven't figured the right way of doing it. So I think I'm closer right now to figuring it out, but I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah. I think your type of content in terms of a consolidated course or a platform that you can use them or find them maybe best as code snippets. So you have a very specific problem that you're coming to search for, and there's a code snippet and a short video to show, okay, this is how you would do it, like tables, paginations, I don't know, loading state, error boundaries, client server compositions in Next.js. And I think in that sense, it would be relevant. But I think it would be more appealing to intermediate people who already know Next.js, they know their problem, and they're like, okay, how do I do this here? And then they can see your code, visually understand what it is, and maybe even there's a code snippet that they can kind of customize to their own need. As a beginner, if somebody watches your video, probably have no clue what you're talking about or what this even means. So I think your content is more intermediate and advanced for people who already know Next.js, maybe from the pages router. They just want to know how things work in the app router. They don't have the time to read the documentation. If they had, probably they don't need your video or my video. But then they're like, okay, you show them the door. Okay, this is how it's done. If it rings a bell in their head, they're like, okay, I will investigate a bit more, maybe diving deeper into the docs or watching a video that maybe I have or other creators have. Um, I like your analogy of showing the possibilities or how to think about this new concepts in a very short format. Um, and some channels, as you mentioned, do it and then hook it to something else. But yours is just like, no, these are the pain points that I have gone through or you may go through when dealing with the app router in the Next.js. And this is how to think about them in a very simple 30-second video. I think it's useful. And if you condense them into one huge database that people can search, and then see a little video and a code snippet, I think it would do good for, I know I would go on and then search if I'm thinking of something and I'm like, how do I do this? I can search it up. Now, something that comes up quite often is, doing animations, for example, in the app router. And it's a pain point using framer motion, for example, to do exit transitions. Now, had I known that you have such a thing, I would just go and search to see if you have anything or not. And sometimes even when, I'm asking around in the community to see, like if anyone has come up with a solution, people mention all these different sources, my channel, other channels, your videos, and they're like, no, you have none. Alex hasn't come up with it yet. So it's like they're aware of all these solutions out there that we put together. And I think it would be a valuable resource for intermediate and more advanced
The thing
users
is, like,
for sure. But
as I
we'll see
said,
how it
I
goes.
just need to validate it, try it out. It may not work in the way that I presented it, just demoed it, but it's fine. The thing is, I'm passionate about the medium. Like, I think there is a lot in this medium, it's unexplored, because we didn't have the tools for that before, I think. Like the platforms, like the social platforms, people think of them when you think of social platforms and of short videos, you think marketing, right? For something bigger. And not a lot of folks are trying to do like short-term content that is content, and that's it. It's not just marketing. It is content. It's something that's supposed to solve your pain without providing necessarily a hook to hook you into some course or something. It's literally that. Like you have the problem, like I don't understand how to do an exit animation in Framer. By the way, I think it's still impossible, right? The exit animation in Framer? I haven't checked it, but yeah. It seems like it's
It is, but not in the app
there was some
router.
complications with the way the templates work. But anyway, let's say you have this problem.
Yeah.
Like this is how you can fix it. 30 seconds. So my goal is you watch those 30 seconds and you don't have this problem anymore. That's it. And I think there's not a lot of content like that. I see Lee Robinson doing the shorter and shorter Twitter videos about how to make a notification in 4 minutes. Loved it, Obviously, Delba is absolute gold, right? The things she does with Remotion, it's just incredible. Like you don't think it's possible even. Like I worked with Remotion a lot, and it's just an amazing tool. There is so much potential in terms of it, because think about it. You have the video that you coded, sort of, right? You have the thing that is React code, which is your video. And then you click render, it renders, right? And then 2 months passes, something changes. You go to your React code, change a couple of lines, click render, and you get the new video. So you cannot do that with the usual recording sort of things. It's just impossible. You need to re-record it. But with Remotion, it opens up this. It's mind-blowing,
Yeah.
but there are not a lot of use cases of that right now. And Delba being like, doing this as a, without any references, it's just insane to me. And the quality of the videos, just incredible. So to me, the things that Delba does, with all the short-term content on Twitter and YouTube, the things that lead us. It's just super, super interesting to me. It doesn't mean that, that's all we need to do, because you need all this context and you need documentation and you need the chat GPT being populated with all the data about UpRouter finally and all that. But it's just another angle, sort of a thing. And I think it's really, really interesting angle with a lot of potential for education.
I agree. It's interesting you mentioned that because I'm taking it back to how I think about my own content here, really, for a second. Most of my content would be in a search-based bucket where you're searching for something very specific. It's a concept, it's a technique, it's a problem, and then I have videos about it. It's not entertaining, it's not project-based, it's search-based. Because when you're thinking about videos or in longer forms like YouTube, there's search-based and then recommendations-based, where a video would pop up and somebody would just click on it to see it because it's educational or entertaining for one way or another, but it may not be specifically a problem they're facing. They're not searching for it actively. Whereas most of my content, most of your content is probably more search-based. There's a problem, there's a specific pain point, there's a specific content that we're talking about, and unless you have that problem or searching for it, you may not even be interested in watching that video. And this specific medium of having shorter form content being targeted at a very specific subject, whether authentication or partial pre-rendering, as Delba has, is amazing. Now, Delba is coming to the channel actually talking about caching. So we're trying to demystify caching in Next.js with Delba, hopefully on the channel. So for folks who are watching, stay tuned for that video. I'm really excited about talking to Delba, but also diving deeper into caching, because as you also mentioned, it's a pain point in Next.js. But yeah, her videos is awesome. Not only the use of animations and remotion into visually showing what she's talking about, but the condensity of the script even seems like a, I don't know, tech documentary. I was looking at partial pre-rendering video that she did, talking about how things were to be rendered from the server and now the client, and then what partial pre-rendering is trying to do is amazing. Lee also has these type of content, but also more wider content on this channel, and it's also a very good resource. But when you're thinking about that, like from a company perspective, it makes sense to have problem-specific short-form content where somebody just watches a video and the problem is solved. They're not trying to hook it into anything else because, well, from a perspective of a company, a user is already using Next.js, deploying to Vercel, and I'm just serving you, solving your problem, so you continue using Next.js and Vercel. So it makes sense for them. But for independent content creators, unless you are an evangelist for React or Next.js or just want to lift up the community on its own, there's always this other side of it that this content is serving as a purpose to, I don't know, maybe drive your consulting business, maybe drive your course business. Now, for me, it wasn't. For me, in the beginning, it was just sharing what I was learning, and then this whole thing kind of came about on the side without me actually doing it intentionally. People kept asking me the same questions, and I was like, okay, maybe I just condense everything in a curriculum, in a course that people can use, because there was nothing back then when the app router came out. As a byproduct of what I was doing on YouTube, and you may even argue that on YouTube, I'm just putting out 2 videos a week. It's just even more up-to-date and cutting-edge. The course, I'm updating it. It's a living, breathing thing. Every time that there's an update, a new version, I will update it or re-record it. But it's more of a curriculum for somebody to start and go through, understanding everything that there is for you to know about building with Next.js. But I think that also is okay. It's like they're serving 2 different purposes, or from 2 different perspectives, from a content creator, from an influencer, from an educator, from a company
Yeah, for sure.
perspective.
And
It all
the
is
thing that
different,
you
and
said,
it
first of all,
complements one
let me go
another.
point by point. Delba, And the animation, the use of animation. I love it because a lot of time folks ask me like what I use to create animations. And yeah, if someone watches the video, so the animations are not the point. In fact, I am trying to cut out animations right now because I think they're distracting. So the animation is when you watch the video about partial pre-rendering, and you have the kind of two overlapping things, backend and frontend, and they kind of get skewed, and then you see how the partial pre-rendering works. This is not animation. Well, it is animation, but it's like the animation is not the point here. The point here is that how I can explain the concept in the least amount of words and just explain the concept more effectively. And the way she does it is genius, right? But the animation is not the point. Animation is a way for her to explain the concept, to provide value, to provide the most amount of value to the user. And that's the thing. That's about the animation part. About the course thing is that yeah, first of all, the building of the course, right? I create a lot of my content, not a lot, all of my content for free right now. And it's not only because I'm evangelist, right? So what I think is that the only way of building an ethical business is when you embed yourself in the community and you spend a lot of time there and you start providing a lot of content for free, the same way you did, right? And you do all that and you face all those pains yourself. And you do that, for a lot of time until you do it for a lot of time until you get enough information to build something for people that is really valuable. Because after this prolonged period of time, you understand what people really need, what people find valuable, and what will help people. And at this point, I will feel comfortable asking money for that because I know that, for those money, you will get the benefits, right? So it's like win-win situation. This is in terms of and that's what I'm trying to kind of find with this course right now. Again, not sure. And this is a segue to another point, right? That you mentioned that searchable content versus the structured content. That's one of the biggest problems for me because like all of my content right now is sort of a searchable content, although Twitter doesn't have a proper search. But the course is structured content, but it's really hard for me to create a structured content from the medium I'm passionate about, which is the short snippets. And that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. So how I create and if I even need to create a structured content for, as you mentioned, for folks who are more intermediate and they just need to, just scan around quickly and check some concepts and go about their business. Maybe they need just a database or something. There is a guy, I forgot his name, unfortunately, but he does the sort of infographics for React, on Twitter. It's like yeah, it's like diagrams that are
Infographics? What do you mean by
animated
that? Like
for React.
diagrams?
No? Let me check it right now, I guess. Well, it will be hard. I won't find him right now. Anyway, yeah,
No.
but this guy and is a great content. And what he does is he sells sort of just the videos, the infographics, the animations in a zip archive, as far as I understand. And as a sort of which is like interesting if you think about it, kind of blows my mind a little bit, right? It's an interesting way to kind of monetize the content, but even just to understand that there's other areas also open, and he has a great content for free on Twitter. Unfortunately, I forgot his name, but yeah, and but that's the way you can monetize it. So yeah, for me, it's like finding a proper way of creating the structured content is my main challenge for the next few months.
And that is the hard part. I think when you're creating a course, is creating videos on a specific topics is, it requires effort, search for you to understand and to be able to visually and in a short, simple way explain it to somebody else to understand. Sure, that's also a part of creating a course, but I feel like the structure is the most important one. What are you going to talk about? Where are you going to start? What are the stuff that you need to move this person through module from module to shape that understanding holistically about an entire Next.js app or about a project? It's not just talking about a specific content or topic. So that part is the hard part. Design the course, or if somebody actually benefits from it, depends on how well you have structured the course. And some type of content may not be able even to be fitted into a structure, as you mentioned. Maybe when I'm thinking about your content, the first thing that pops to my mind is just a searchable, just database of code snippets and problems and concepts, quick and short, because or at least the way that the stuff that you have already done. If you wanted to go into a structured way of doing it, well, then you need to maybe talk about stuff that are not maybe problematic, but needs to be there as a starting point of a course, because that's what the structure requires. So that is one part. And then when you are thinking of the course, if you want to keep it updated, as I'm doing for mine, since last year that I published a course, well, there's updates in Next.js. There's things are happening in every version. So you have to re-record, you have to restructure the course. I have maybe started from, I'm not sure how many videos, but I've added so much more videos as things start popping out in Next.js or become stable. And then Next.js 15 is even changing everything else. So I have to redo the whole stuff. So it just changes. It has a lot more work than just creating a short form content that can just live on its own. And then when it gets obsolete, you're like, okay, sure, I'll create another updated version. I don't have to go back and redo this whole course or this whole module, because now this ties into, like, let's say, let me give you an example, like server actions. When I was doing my course back in Next.js 13, server actions weren't even stable. I talked about them in the course, but that was not the way to handle forms. I started doing it. My videos actually, I knew that that's the future way, but it wasn't still something that you would do in production. In Next.js 14, server actions are now stable. So you have to just rethink the whole structure of, okay, now we're not just we don't have any route handlers or API server actions. Now there's two new hooks: use form state, use form status. So this changes not only one video, but the structure around how you're thinking about this course of one person moving through these chapters or building a project
And
behind the scene
yeah,
for this whole
and
course to come together.
the interesting
So yeah,
part is
it's a
the
journey on it.
what I wanted to say. The interesting part about the structured content, right? And the problem of content creators with Next.js is that Next.js iterates like crazy, right? So the thing is, like, while you think about like how to create content, they will create better content about this thing, and that's an interesting challenge when you're in Next.js community, which is obviously great for community as a whole. But yeah, as I said, to me, like what I'm passionate about, like how I think about it right now is like I'm passionate about this medium. It's like for me, it's like being an explorer a little bit, you know? I always wanted to create some sort of a new, like reinvent bicycles, obviously. That's what I did in my first agency, but trying to create some sort of experience, visual experience that didn't exist at the time. I sort of made my version of React before React, which was pretty like absolutely terrible, and all this stuff. So I'm interested in creating the new things and trying the untried sort of, things and solutions. And yeah, I'm just thinking about it in this way, that I'm just passionate. I will continue doing that. If it brings me to creating some sort of a new platform that will actually work for users, great. If not, I will think of another way of, trying to monetize it, or think of another way of doing things differently. But yeah, I understand that it would be really hard for me to provide structure, which is, yeah, you're really good at it, by the way, of providing the structure and context. It's a pleasure to watch your videos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned my videos. I want to get your like a selfish talk here. What is your? Do you have any feedback? What do you think of the videos I create on the channel? And you know,
The
if you have
same
watched any
thing
of
that
them,
you said
what
in
do
the
you think of
beginning, I started
the videos,
noticing your
or if you
videos
have any feedback
when
from me?
the uproter came out, and you tackling the concepts that weren't like tackled before, right? Probably doing the same thing as me when you go into some deep GitHub discussions between, between core maintainers of Next.js and trying to distill something out of there into some sort of a content. That's how I started noticing new content. I don't do YouTube a lot just because it's not the medium I spend a lot of time on. It's just I'm trying to limit the amount of information, which is funny comment from me doing the Twitter stuff. But anyway, and yeah, but that's when I started noticing your stuff. And then the next sort of a layer of it is when you started doing this podcast, by the way. This I think is really interesting, right? Because you are the first sort of a person who is doing the next, like the podcast in this particular community, right?
Um,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
so.
So
It's
that was
if
then
you're
the kind
just
of the
Next.js
second kind
specific,
of
maybe.
wave
Yeah,
where I started seeing more and more of your content. Was the podcast?
I see. I see. Okay, interesting to know that because I don't know how this is still something new that I've started doing, and obviously I'm living, breathing Next and React on my channel, so it will be tailored one way or another around Next.js. But it's great to hear your feedback on the interview parts on the podcast part because for people or for audience who are coming to my channel or they're used to just search-based content, learning about Next.js or a pain point or how do I build this and whatnot, uh, it might not be for that audience, but maybe it's serving another audience, which may be like you. They're already involved in the community. They want to hear about other people involved in the community, where we're all going, and enjoy this type of conversation. So it's a different segment. It's a different audience. It's serving a different, probably. Community, but I'm excited about it too because most of the people who I bring to the channel are either active or have influenced me or are thought leaders in this space. So I learn a lot from them, have already, or maybe in future. So it's very interesting to have these conversations, and I grow my network like this as well. I tweeted you the other day. I was like, "Hey man, I've seen your content. Let's just hop
And
on a
that's the
call. Let's
beauty of it,
chat.
right?
You
Because
talk
like I got
Next.js, I talk
contacted
Next.js. We
obviously
can talk
by
forever
other folks,
Next.js."
but
So,
like immediately when I saw your tweet, I was like, of course, because I saw you, I saw the content you put out. Like, yeah, we have things to discuss, really discuss, without the agenda even or anything. We can just jump in and discuss this stuff. And that's what I'm really interested. You mentioned Delba. I'm fascinated about the hearing from her perspective or how like she thinks about education. And it's not like you see a lot of podcasts with Delba, so it's yeah, it's super exciting.
yeah, I'm excited for that one too. Well, Alex, we went over time. As I mentioned, I could just continue talking with you. It's just interesting stuff. Maybe we continue this conversation in a second part later on. But thank you very much for your time jumping in on this call with me and sharing your perspective from the journey React and Next.js has. Thank you for the amazing content you put out on the video. I'm going to include a link in this description to your Twitter handle for people who want to explore your content. I'm looking forward for you and for your course if you
Yeah, thanks a
decided to put
lot.
it
Thanks a lot,
together
Ahmet. It was
to see how
a
that
pleasure. Thanks
does.
for having me. And yeah, it was great. Thanks.
Awesome. So that's a wrap for this video, folks. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.